In the quiet backstreets of Birmingham, the year was 1912. The smoke of industry thickened the skies while poverty clung to the bones of every slum child. Among the soot-covered cobblestones and cold tenement walls, a little girl named Eleanor Rose Carter came into the world. She was born into silence, her mother barely able to scream from the pain of childbirth. Her father, already deep in drink, didn't look at her face. He wanted a boy. He turned away. Eleanor's mother, Margaret, was only 16 when she gave birth. She was frail, broken by years of neglect and hunger, sold by her own father for a few pounds to a man twice her age. That man became Eleanor's father, Thomas Carter. A coal worker by day and a violent drunk by night. He didn't want a daughter. And Eleanor felt it in every glance, every skipped meal, and every slap across the face. By the age of 5, Eleanor had already learned how to hide her bruises. She'd sit in the schoolroom, silent and wide-eyed, her long dark hair shielding her from the world. The teacher barely noticed her. She was quiet. She was strange. She never smiled. Other children whispered that her house was cursed. No one wanted to play with the girl who smelled of coal and sorrow. At home, things were worse. Her mother had grown silent, emotionally absent, and often stared blankly through the window for hours. Thomas beat both of them regularly. Sometimes Eleanor would lock herself in the cupboard under the stairs just to find silence. It was small and dark, but it was hers. Her only peace. When Eleanor turned 10, her mother fell ill. The fever came suddenly. There were no doctors who visited the poor, only whispers and cloths dipped in vinegar. By the time the woman's body cooled, Eleanor was completely alone. Thomas didn't even bury her properly. He left her body in the alley and told Eleanor to forget she ever had a mother. But Eleanor remembered. Every day. After her mother's death, Thomas grew worse. With no wife to abuse, all of his rage turned toward Eleanor. He called her useless, a devil's child, and worse. She was forbidden from going to school. Forbidden from going outside. She became a ghost, locked inside her own home, trapped in a nightmare without end. One bitter night in January, when Eleanor was just 13, the unthinkable happened. Her father came to her room with heavy steps and heavier breath. What followed was horror. Silent, violent, unforgivable. When it was over, Eleanor lay on the floor, eyes open, her innocence stolen, her childhood murdered in the dark. Weeks passed. Then came the nausea, the aches, the missed months. Eleanor didn't understand at first. She thought it was punishment. A sickness. But the truth came swiftly and cruelly. She was pregnant. At 13. Thomas, cruel as ever, pretended not to know. He shouted when she refused to cook. He beat her when she couldn't stand. And he threatened to throw her onto the street if she told a soul. Eleanor was terrified. No one would believe her. No one ever had. When the town midwife, Mrs. Bramble, noticed Eleanor's growing belly on a rare visit to the market, rumors began to spread. Whispers filled the air like smoke. The Carter girl, they said. Pregnant. A bastard child. But no one asked who the father was. No one dared. In the 9th month, Eleanor's body gave in. She delivered the child alone, in the same room where her mother had died, on a filthy mattress with no one to hold her hand. The baby cried. A girl. Eleanor didn't cry. She simply stared. She named her daughter Hope. But hope was hard to hold onto in a world that offered none. Eleanor stared at the tiny child in her arms. Hope was wrapped in an old coat, her little hands clenched into fists as if fighting against the cold world she had been born into. There was no crib, no toys, no lullaby, just a silent girl and her baby in a room that stank of rotten despair. Thomas didn't speak of the child. He refused to look at her, and when he did, it was with disgust. He threatened to kill the baby more than once. Eleanor began sleeping with Hope clutched against her chest, fearing that any moment might be her last. She learned to cook with one arm and rock a cradle made from a basket with the other. She was 13, and yet she had become mother, protector, and prisoner all at once. Despite the horror, Eleanor felt a strange kind of strength. It wasn't joy, but it was fire, a spark deep inside her. She swore that her child would never live the life she had. Never know the sting of belts or the silence of hunger. Eleanor began saving crusts of bread. She hid coins in the floorboards. She watched the world through broken windows and planned her escape. The escape came one night in silence. Thomas was passed out drunk, snoring like a dying ox. Eleanor crept down the stairs with hope bundled tightly to her chest. She didn't even have shoes. Her feet were wrapped in cloth. But her mind was sharp and her eyes were clear. She walked into the cold, foggy streets of Birmingham with no idea where to go, but knowing she could never go back. They slept in alleys for a week. Then under a bridge, a kind baker gave her bread. A laundress gave her an old blanket. The kindness of strangers was rare, but not extinct. Eventually, she found a home for unwed mothers run by nuns. They took her in, not with warmth, but with duty. Sister Agnes was the one who gave her a bed. She looked at Eleanor like she was filth. But at least there was a roof. The convent was not a place of love. It was cold and harsh. The nuns believed suffering brought salvation. Eleanor was made to scrub floors with bleeding hands. She ate only what was left after others had eaten. Hope was taken to a nursery and seen only at strict hours. Eleanor cried every night, but she endured. At 14, she was taught to read properly. Books became her second child. She read history, politics, philosophy. Anything the convent had. She became obsessed with Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, powerful and feared. Eleanor saw herself in the Queen's iron will. She imagined herself not just surviving, but ruling. When she turned 15, the convent insisted she give Hope up for adoption. They said she was too young, that the child would suffer. But Eleanor refused. She clung to her daughter like a lioness. She fought the system, wrote letters, begged a lawyer who visited the convent to help her. He did. Her first victory. Hope would stay. By 16, Eleanor began working for a textile factory near London. The machines roared day and night. Her fingers bled from stitching. But she saved every coin. She studied by candlelight. And on Sundays, she walked through the city streets, memorizing the people in power. She watched how men moved, how they talked, how they commanded. One evening, outside a political rally, Eleanor stood and listened to a man speak about workers' rights. His words stirred her blood. After the crowd left, she approached him. His name was Harold Whitmore, a young socialist rising through party ranks. He was struck by her intelligence. He invited her to a meeting. She went. Then another. Soon she was speaking too. She was 17 when she gave her first speech in front of 50 people. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked. But her words hit like hammers. She spoke of hunger, of abuse, of forgotten girls and children born in filth. People cried. People clapped. And Eleanor realized something. Her voice was her weapon. And she would never be silent again. Hope grew alongside her mother. She was smart, shy, but strong. Eleanor taught her letters, then ideas, then dreams. They lived in a tiny room above a bakery. But it was theirs. And every night, Eleanor promised her daughter a better world. Not just for them, but for everyone. At 19, Eleanor joined the Labour Party. She was the youngest woman in her district to do so. She wore second-hand coats and walked to every meeting. Men laughed at her, called her the slum girl. But she smiled, because she knew she would outwork them all. She debated with fury and logic. She called out corruption. She fought for childcare laws and safe housing. Newspapers started to notice. The Iron Girl of East London, they called her. She hated the name, but she liked what it meant. People were listening. By 22, Eleanor Carter was a name people feared in the local council. She was relentless, passionate, smart, and impossible to ignore. But behind every victory, she still carried the weight of her past. Every speech echoed the cries of her childhood. Every law she proposed came from the pain she lived. She knew she couldn't stop now. At 23, Eleanor Carter ran for local office. People laughed. She had no wealthy backers, no connections, no polished speeches. But she had a voice that shook rooms and a story that broke hearts. Her posters were cheap. Her campaign shoes had holes. But her eyes were clear. And her will was steel. She walked door to door, shaking hands, telling the truth. She didn't pretend. She didn't soften the edges. She told people who she was: a girl abused, a child mother, a fighter. And they listened. Because she spoke like one of them. Because she was. Her opponents were men twice her age. Lawyers, businessmen, gentlemen. They mocked her in debates. Called her emotional. Said she belonged in the kitchen. But Eleanor stood firm. She responded with facts, with policy, with fire. And the people noticed. When election night came, no one expected her to win. Not even Eleanor. She sat with hope in their one-room flat, holding hands, watching the results on a neighbor's tiny radio. The room was silent. Then came the announcement. Eleanor Carter, elected. Local councilwoman for East London. The youngest ever. The next day, newspapers exploded with her name. Slum girl turns politician. Mother at 13, leader at 23. They all focused on her past. But Eleanor didn't care. She wasn't ashamed. She wore her scars like armor. In council, she wasted no time. She proposed new shelters for abused women. She demanded child protection laws. She fought landlords exploiting the poor. Her speeches were fiery. Her methods, uncompromising. She made enemies. Powerful ones. But she didn't flinch. By 25, she had national attention. Political parties came knocking. Some wanted to use her as a symbol. Others wanted to silence her. The Conservative Party dismissed her entirely. A populist girl with a sob story, 1 megapixel said. But the Labour Party saw something more. A future leader. A threat to the establishment. She was offered a place in the party's national wing. A chance to run for parliament. Eleanor accepted. But with conditions. She wanted autonomy. She wanted to fight for real change. And she would not be silenced. In her campaign for MP, Eleanor was targeted viciously. They dug up her past. They printed lies. Called her a harlot. Said she had no father for her child. That she was dangerous. Immoral. She didn't respond with anger. She responded with truth. She stood on stages and told the real story. And every time she did, more people came. Hope, now 12, stood beside her mother during rallies. Quiet, composed, but proud. People saw in them a symbol of survival. A living proof that pain could become power. When Eleanor won her seat in Parliament, she walked into the House of Commons wearing a second-hand coat and a brooch shaped like a lion. Some men refused to shake her hand. But they would come to respect her. Or fear her. Her speeches in Parliament became legendary. She attacked corruption. Defended the working class. She introduced a bill called Hope's Law, named after her daughter, which aimed to protect young girls from abuse and expand access to shelters and education. The chamber was silent when she told her own story during the debate. Many cried. The bill passed. By 30, Eleanor had become one of the most recognized voices in British politics. But with fame came danger. She received threats, hate letters. Once, her office was firebombed. But she did not stop. She hired extra security, kissed her daughter goodnight, and returned to work the next day. Unshaken. The Prime Minister at the time, a seasoned conservative man, refused to take her seriously. He called her the girl with too many feelings. She responded with data, strategy, and strength. Slowly, her influence grew. Slowly, the people began to whisper. Eleanor Carter could be more than an MP. She never chased titles. She chased justice. But destiny had plans. When the leader of the Labour Party resigned amid scandal, Eleanor was urged to run. She hesitated. Could a woman like her, born in filth, mother at 13, abused and ignored, lead an entire party? She looked at Hope, now 17, strong, beautiful, smart, a future of her own. And Eleanor decided she would not run from power. She would claim it. The leadership election was brutal. Eleanor faced seasoned men, wealthy donors, and backroom deals. But she had something they didn't: the people. Her rallies drew thousands. Her speeches went viral. Her story resonated not just with the poor, but with anyone who had ever been underestimated. She won the leadership in a landslide. And the newspapers that once mocked her now printed bold headlines: From slum to power, Eleanor Carter takes the crown. But the fight was far from over. The year was 1945. Britain was wounded by war, but ready for change. The people were tired of empty promises, of polished men in powdered rooms making decisions for lives they could never understand. And into that silence stepped Eleanor Carter. Now 34, she stood at the helm of the Labor Party. The first woman to ever do so. A survivor. A mother. A woman forged in fire. The people didn't just admire her, they trusted her. Because she had lived the suffering they felt. And because she had never once backed down. The general election campaign was historic. Eleanor toured the country by train, speaking in mining towns, ports, bombed out cities. Her voice rang over loudspeakers. She told the people, "We do not need sympathy. We need justice. We do not need rescue. We need power." Opponents smeared her again, called her dangerous, a socialist radical, a woman too emotional for statecraft. But every attack only made her stronger. Crowds swelled in the thousands. And when the election results came in, Britain had made its choice. Eleanor Carter was Prime Minister. The country erupted. For the first time in history, a woman who had once been homeless, beaten, and pregnant at 13, now led the British Empire. The slum girl was now the queen of policy. And she would not waste her crown. Her government got to work immediately. She created a ministry for child welfare. Opened hundreds of schools and shelters. Her Housing Act of 1946 rebuilt neighborhoods brick by brick. The Carter Education Bill made schooling free for all girls and boys until age 16. Her fight wasn't for legacy, it was for transformation. But power never comes without a price. The old establishment resisted her every move. Wealthy landowners fought her housing reforms. Industrialists battled her worker protections. And in Parliament, whispers of scandal circled constantly. They tried to paint her as unstable, as power-hungry, as unfit. She stood her ground. She gave speeches that burned in the memory of the nation. "I am not here to be loved. I am here to build a country where every child sleeps with a roof over their head, a meal in their belly, and a book in their hand." Her voice was hoarse from speeches. Her body weary. But she never stopped. Hope, now 21, became her mother's advisor. A brilliant young woman, she understood politics, but more importantly, she understood people. Together, they were a force. They called them the two lions. One born from survival, the other from vision. Eleanor served 2 terms. During that time, Britain saw the lowest child poverty rates in its history. Abuse reporting systems were reformed. Domestic violence was recognized as a crime, not a private affair. And for the first time, girls from slums across the country dared to dream of becoming more. But power was heavy. In her 3rd term, Eleanor's health began to fade. The long years of fighting, of hunger in youth, of exhaustion, caught up with her. She collapsed in Parliament after a late-night session on workers' pensions. Doctors warned her to rest. She refused. One winter morning, she gave one final national address. She stood before the nation not as a politician, but as a woman who had climbed out of the grave life tried to bury her in. She looked into the camera and said, "I was broken before I could even spell the word. But this country, this fight, this hope, has rebuilt me. And now I pass this flame to you. Never let the darkness win." The next day, she stepped down. Eleanor Carter retired from office at 43. She left with no statues, no parades, just the quiet respect of a grateful nation and the tearful farewell of millions who saw themselves in her struggle. She spent her remaining years mentoring women in politics. She visited shelters anonymously. She wrote essays on leadership, justice, and survival. Her home was modest, her table always set for guests, her lion brooch never taken off. At 58, Eleanor Carter passed away in her sleep. No pain. No sorrow. Just peace. The country mourned. Flags were lowered. Bells tolled across London. And thousands gathered at Parliament Square, holding candles, chanting a single word: hope. Her daughter Hope continued her legacy, becoming a respected leader in her own right. But she never forgot the girl who had carried her through cold streets in rags. She once said in an interview,